And welcome back to some of the Cooler Jets podcast. We have Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, free agency only a few days away. Our last podcast before the new league year gets underway and the Jets start making trades and slowly suck us back into this. I'm ready for the Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter Twitter notifications to really get me excited for the season. A lot to go over today. Going to be making our ideal free agency plans and making some final predictions before we get out of here. Won't be too long. We did our preview on our last podcast. And I guess we could start here because our last podcast, we kicked it off with saying, step one of the offseason, some of the moves the Jets need to make. The Jets already made it. This is old news. But finally, Michael, you can say goodbye to your friends, Laken Tomlinson and CJ Uzama. So with that in mind, how are you doing a few days out from free agency?
Yeah, I'm very excited for free agency. It's been, I feel like a really long couple months since the end of the season, just because I think, compared to last season where, they were fairly competitive, we were checked out pretty early in this one, maybe like 4 plays into the season.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And you've been stuck.
Yeah.
You've been stuck writing articles here in January and February about this team. So I think it's just felt very long for you. Because for me, it's like, all right, I took a nice little break from the Jets for like the entire month of January and a little bit of February. So I'm ready to get back into it. But I know what you mean, where it's like this period is the dead period. And then once the combine happens, that's really when I start to get into it and start watching draft prospects a lot and reading about free agency and stuff. And you've done a lot of great articles. And one of the guys that you've written about, which is kind of like the big fish. Sorry, did I cut you off? Did you have more to say there? I feel like I kind of just went into host mode, but I don't know if you had anything else there. I asked you how you were doing, and then I completely just ran it over. So
I was doing good, but terrible now.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I guess we'll start here because we did the preview last pod. This is just like final predictions. Do you think the Jets land a big fish? And there's only really a few in the market. Obviously, the big one that I was going to mention is Tyron Smith. I think we can start there. But do you think the Jets land a big fish in this free agency, or do you think this is going to be quantity over quality?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you define a big fish as. I mean, in terms of getting a big receiver, it feels like a lot of those options are already kind of off the board. I mean, Mike Evans is gone. Pittman and T. Higgins were tagged. Devontae Adams doesn't seem like he's getting traded. So a lot of those are gone already. And, it looks like Calvin Ridley's going to headline the receiver class now. Then after him, it's a pretty big drop-off. I mean, there's really no one else in this receiver group who you could consider on his level or even like whatever you might consider Calvin Ridley, like high-end number 2, low-end number 1, whatever you might put him as. There's a pretty big drop-off after that. And then the offensive lineman, Kevin Dotson's already gone. He got $16 million a year to re-sign with the Rams. He might have been a potential big fish. Outside of that, there are a handful of guys who could fall in that umbrella. Michael Onwenu from the Patriots, Tyron Smith, maybe. We'll see what the structure of his deal ends up being, how much money he gets. But outside of that, it's not really a star-studded free agency in terms of the positions that the Jets need, which is why I think it is really going to be more of a quantity and value sort of haul than it is here's your big superstar, big ticket kind of edition.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. And that's kind of what we outlined, obviously in the last podcast, just how many holes they have to fill on the offensive line. They want to bring in at least another receiver. But the one thing that we did talk about was that they always make a trade every single offseason that we never talk about. And there were some rumblings this week about 2 different Broncos receivers, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. What do you think about that? Because like you said, the free agent market is pretty slim unless they're going to go after Calvin Ridley. It's going to be that quantity over quality. It's going to be the Tyler Boyds and the Kendrick Bournes and the Josh Reynolds, maybe a Hollywood Brown type. But like you said, like Mike Evans is off the board. You could look to the trade market, and as opposed to a guy like Devontae Adams or Brandon Ayuk, which I just don't see as realistic, you could get a guy like Cortland Sutton for maybe one of those 4th-round picks that the Jets have. Maybe it's a part of a deal to send Zach Wilson to Denver. Who knows? And you could get him at a fairly reasonable price. What do you think about a potential trade for Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy?
I think both are definitely on the table, and to me, it just really comes down to, I think this is where Rodgers' input is really going to matter. I think this is where the Jets might, you know, not necessarily have him dictate the entire decision in terms of who they're targeting, although maybe they will go that far based on how last offseason went. But I think at the very least, you're going to have Rodgers' input in terms of like, what does he feel like he needs at wide receiver, and relative to the offensive line, what is, obviously that's imperative, but in terms of receiver, does he feel like he needs a big body, number two like Cortland Sutton? Does he feel like he can work with, just get me a couple solid veterans I could trust? Let's get depth in here. I don't need, like a big time number two, 1-2 punch with Garrett Wilson. I think this is where his input is going to matter. Like I said, in terms of just how it's going to be structured, more so than get me this guy, get me that guy. Although, again, like I
Well,
said, maybe it will be that way. Maybe it will be that
Marquez
way.
Valdez-Scantling,
Welcome
and a starting
MVS.
role
We're
for Alan
going to
Lazard.
see what Jordy Nelson is up to. We're going to give him a call and we'll go from there. Maybe Donald Driver is available. I don't know. But yeah, like I think this is where Rodgers is going to come in. But in terms of Sutton and Judy, I'm not interested in Judy. I just don't think he's all that great. He's been, he's a name because he was a first round pick, but he really never showed much of a ceiling over there to where I would want to trade. Obviously every player has a price, so it depends on what the trade package would be. If it's a very late pick, then, maybe, but I just feel like Sutton is a much better fit for what they need. He's a great deep threat. He gives them size that they don't really have at wide receiver. Alan Lazard has size, but he doesn't use it in any way, shape, or form. He complements Garrett Wilson in a way where I feel like he can force the defense to change the way they play this Jets offense and create some more space for Garrett Wilson in a way that I don't think a Jerry Jeudy really does, because he kind of feels just like a very light version, great value version of Garrett Wilson. More like, smaller frame, route running, but obviously just not nearly the player. So I like the fit for Sutton a lot. Obviously, just
he did Moss
what the
Pierre
draft pick is.
He did Moss Pierre Desir that one time a couple of years ago.
Although that was the Pierre Desir, dominant. That was his signature Jets performance.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think Sutton's interesting to me, and we'll get into our predictions later. But I have been kind of on the wave of like just going quantity over quality, because I think
the question, we were discussing this. He did have a subtle Nathaniel Hackett jab. He posted during this past season a Russell Wilson apology form, and one of the options on there for why you're apologizing for criticizing Russell Wilson was, the media convinced me that it was Russ's fault, not Hackett's fault in 2022. Well, maybe he didn't see it and he was just reposting a meme.
No, he probably did.
Daniel Hackett's his favorite coach.
Here's what I would say is
not great.
Hackett isn't the coach. Aaron Rodgers is. You know what I mean? Like we know that this offense is going to look a lot different. Look, maybe this is a coping mechanism, but that's at least what I would say. If I don't think Cortland Sutton, I don't know him, but obviously, but like I don't think he would have a huge problem going to New York, big media market, play opposite Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers, And like at the very least, Hackett might not be a coach he respects, but I doubt he's a coach he hates. He seems like a pretty friendly, easy guy. I think the issue with Hackett might be like not holding players accountable and whatnot. Maybe he's a bit of a buffoon, but it's not like he's some drill sergeant that Cortland Sutton wants to avoid at all times, which may or may not be the case with Keith Carter, the offensive line coach. Which
it's a different role. Him being the head coach versus the OC is entirely different. And I don't think the problem with him in Denver or any coaching spot really has been him being unlikable. I think it's just bad play calling and play design, just tactically. But I don't think he's like Adam Gase is the type of guy you look at like maybe players don't want to play for him because he doesn't seem like the coolest dude. But Hackett does seem likable at least, and it would be a trade, so it's not like he'd have say in it.
That's true.
But
what do you think? What do you think about the potential of Zach Wilson ending up in Denver? Because that would be the ultimate Sean Payton move to stick it to Hackett and back up his comments, is get something out of Zach Wilson. And also, they have nobody at quarterback, so And
wherever he goes, it would just be good to get something because his value is so low.
What do you think it would take to get Cortland Sutton if the Broncos are mildly interested in Zach Wilson? In signing Zach Wilson and then, or in trading for Zach Wilson and then signing somebody. like a Gardner Minshew or somebody. What do you think? What do you think a Zach Wilson for Cortland Sutton trade? What would the pick have to be attached to?
I don't know if he changes it. I feel like they're going to
Oh,
push for a third round pick, but I don't think he's worth enough to be like, okay, we'll move it down to a fourth because we're
you
getting
don't think
him
a
too.
fourth and Zach Wilson gets that trade done?
Because what is he probably valued at? If he had a straight up trade for a
A,
draft pick,
a,
probably a sixth
a,
or a seventh.
I would say
And I
six
don't
probably.
and
Maybe
I
it
don't
could,
think in terms of the value of the picks and how they're valued on the charts and stuff, that's not enough to move it from a third to a fourth. So
yeah,
I don't know, unless maybe there was like a pick swap in there. Jets throw the third over
no.
with Zach Wilson. Broncos send back like a fifth or something like that. Maybe that type of deal. But I mean, there are other receivers too that are worth thinking about. I mean, Mike Williams is one that definitely could be on the market. New regime coming off an ACL. He has a huge cap number. It might be released or traded. He's interesting as well. He's a similar skill set to Sutton, big body, contested catches, deep threat, which I also think would complement Garrett Wilson really well. But as we'll get into with some of our predictions, our preferences for what we think is ideal, I don't know if that's part of the most optimal plan for the Jets this offseason is giving up a draft pick for one of these more expensive receivers when
No, I
they
don't.
could
No.
be more economical and spread the money around, really focus on the offensive line and just be more focused on value with receivers. So personally, I lean away from some of these trade options. I think they're worth considering if you can get these guys at the right price. Obviously, you would love to have them. Like I said before, every player has a price that makes sense for them. So due diligence, as Joe Douglas always does. But personally, I don't know if these types of moves are at the top of my list.
You mentioned Owenu briefly, and we jumped to receiver. I just want to circle back to him. How realistic do you think he's kind of a guy we haven't talked? I don't think we talked much about him at all in the last podcast. We mentioned him. He obviously is a big fish, but it seems like when people tie a big fish offensive lineman to the Jets in free agency, it's usually Tyron Smith. What do you think about Owenu's chances of ending up in New York?
I could see it. It to me depends on how they view the scheme fit because I think it is a much different run scheme. The Patriots continue to be one of the heaviest gap power type teams in the league. And the Jets are a pretty balanced team. They're not like a super zone heavy team. Like they do have a good amount of duo in their offense that they ran last year and other type of pin pull power type stuff. So it's not entirely like a wide zone team. They were pretty balanced, but at the same time, they're not as heavy as the Patriots were. And he has the versatility, which I think Joe Douglas likes with AVT, with Tidman. We've seen him prioritize linemen who could play multiple positions, and he can do that. He's played a lot of guard, a lot of tackle. This past season, he was a tackle. So we'll see, but I don't know. Again, just like receiver, it feels like there are so many holes to where I don't know if the best way to go is to get the big fish type guy. It
Right.
might be better to just like let's get a bunch of solid guys, make sure all these holes are plugged
Yeah.
versus okay, we got a superstar, but now do we have to compromise somewhere else because we splurged for him? Because the Jets cap situation really isn't great. It's not awful by any means. They made the cuts they needed to make with Tomlinson and Uzama. And they're probably going to make more moves. Trading Zach Wilson will get you some space. We'll probably see some restructures. But comparing them to the rest of the league, they're only 17th right now. Every team above them has at least 40 million, and the Jets are at 27. This is based on what Spot Track says. And all those other teams are going to make these types of moves too. So when you're comparing the spending power and the ability to win bidding wars, the Jets are middle of the pack, below about half the league. So they don't really have the space to really go wild. And they have so many holes. They need 3 starting linemen, at least 1 starting receiver, a backup quarterback, a lot of holes, almost half of an offense that they need to sign. So I
Yeah.
don't know if they, with their cap situation not being in, because we've seen off seasons where they had 80 million in space, they were top 3, And in those years, it's like, you have the wiggle room to make some of these big additions, like multiple 8-figure contracts, like in 2021 when they signed Lawson, they signed Corey Davis. Next year, they still were able to get Laken Tomlinson. They got Conklin, Uzama, a lot of fairly high end deals at the same time. DJ Reed in there as well. So this year it's not the same. So I don't, with as many holes as they have, and the price that a guy like Owenu I think will get, because he's been productive, he's young, he's versatile. Like, we just saw Kevin Dotson get $60 million at guard, and being a similar profile in terms of age and production. So Owenu is probably going to match or beat that. It just makes it hard if you sign a player like that, to me, to fill the rest of the holes to a level that is acceptable. So I think we're going to see a lot of even spreading with the money more so than one big fish.
All right, last big fish question, then we'll get into these predictions. Who's the big fish in the interior? Because the Jets, after cutting Laken Tomlinson, and we'll see what they do with AVT, at the very least, they're going to sign one interior offensive line free agent, perhaps two, just depending on whether or not they move AVT to tackle. Maybe they play Tippmann at guard. They just have some versatility there, but at the very least, they got to fill Laken Tomlinson's hole, which it's a pretty low bar to clear. But who's the big fish in that unit?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of signing an interior
Zeitler?
guy, I think Zeitler is the guy that you're looking at. And there's an interesting signing. I think it was today or yesterday, but either way, Ezra Cleveland re-signed with the Jaguars, and he went below what I thought he was going to get and way below what his spot track estimation was. He signed for like $9.5 million a year. Spot track had him at 13. And I thought this was notable because he's a guy who, he's not the greatest player. He's probably like an average starter. His pass protection especially isn't great, but he's young. He's only 25, second round pick pedigree, starts pretty much every game the past few seasons. So he had aspects to his profile to where he could have gotten a really good deal, but he still got a good number, but it was less than I thought, especially in with the spiked cap. So I think that kind of set the guard market a little bit lower than I expected. And I know Dotson got a big deal, but that was expected because he was outstanding last season. I'm pretty sure he was an all-pro. So this was different. This was like, what's the mid-tier guard market going to look like with Ezra Cleveland? And so if he's at $9.5 million and he's young, entering his prime, recent second round pick, then I think that really sets the guys like Kevin Zeitler, who's 34 years old, James Hurst, another guy we'll talk about, he's in his 30s. These like veteran, solid guys, probably even lower than that $9.5 million mark. So I think we could see some of these guys end up $5 to $7 million, maybe even less than that. And the Jets could have an opportunity to sign multiple of these guys.
All right, Michael, let's do it. Let's get into, I guess we'll start with like what, an ideal plan for the offseason, then we'll just both make our predictions. One of the guys that we talked about a lot in the last podcast, haven't talked about this much, and this one was Lloyd Cushenberry, and signing a center, kicking Tippmann out to guard. You laid it out the reasons in an article, but to summarize, it's one, the interior market's just a lot stronger than the tackle market, and two, in today's NFL, you want your best offensive lineman, and we think Tippmann is the Jets' blue chip offensive lineman right now, AVT pending. You want him at guard rather than center. He's going to have more matchups against three techs. He's going to have more matchups against the edge rushers. Where at center, you can kind of mask. He kind of just gets buried a little bit. You'd rather have him be an impact player at guard, where he's more opportunities to pull and just make an impact against the defense's impact players. So Cushenberry is a guy who has experience with Hackett, which might be a con, but we'll just throw it in there anyway. Has experience with Hackett, is a good young center, and in comparison to the player that you're going to get versus the price that he's going to cost, he seems like a good value for the Jets. So we made a little list here of the ideal offseason. I guess let's run through it. I'll stop you if there's anything I want to add here, and then we'll get into the prediction parts. But let's hear your ideal plan for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you just mentioned Lloyd Cushenberry. I think he would be part of my ideal offseason. And it would involve some moving around with some of the players who they already have in the building. But I think that's part of the advantage of having Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, is their ability to move, and it gives them the flexibility to approach this market and just focus on getting the most collective talent more so than plugging specific holes. They could say, who's the best player, best value, let's get those guys in here, and then let the pieces fall where they may. And I think Cushionberry is a part of that because, like I said before, it's not the greatest market in terms of there being blue chip players out there, but Cushionberry at center has developed into that. He kind of had a slower start to his career, but he improved every season. And then he broke out into one of the best centers in the league this year, especially in pass blocking. He was a top 5 guy pretty much across the board. And I watched some film of him, and he really stood out to me just with picking up stunts and passing things off, and his one-on-ones looked really good. And the thing for me is, I would, like you mentioned it, but putting Tittman at guard, I think if you like Tittman, as much as we would love to see him follow in Nick Mangold's steps and Kevin Moai's steps, be that next guy in the middle. And I'm not saying that's not important. It absolutely is. Guards are more impactful, and they get paid more money because of that. And there's a reason for it. It's because those are the guys who are blocking Chris Jones, Quinton Williams the whole game, more so than the centers are, because that's where the D tackles line up out there at 3 tech most of the time. So if you like Joe Tittman, putting him at guard is where he could have the greatest impact on the game. So I like Joe Tittman. I think you put him there, he could be even more impactful. And then you replace him, the guy in Cushionberry, who at center has already established himself as a top tier guy. Then you have a really good duo of 2 guys in the interior there. You could add another guard, which we may do in this plan as well, or you could put AVT there. And now you're looking at a really good interior trio. So Cushionberry would be a part of this for me to start this off for sure. But we'll see if the Jets are, if they do explore this, or if they have Tittman as their penciled in center.
Well, keep going. Let's hear the rest of this plan. I know you alluded to signing another guard. You've said in the past that AVT guard is your ideal vision, but then we've also talked about how it's just a lot deeper of a pool
Yeah,
on the interior.
right.
How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, for me, like in a vacuum, I do prefer him being at guard. I think it's just a better fit for a skill set with shorter arms. I feel like he's more of a short area guy than I like his pass protection better in the phone booth against those defensive tackles than out there on the edge. And he's done a good job holding up at tackle when he's had to, but I just don't feel like we've seen enough for me to be fully confident in that yet. He also hasn't really faced the greatest competition out there in the games he's played at tackle. So he can do it, but I do prefer guard. But with that being said, this offseason is so crucial. You just have to build a great 5-man unit. And just looking at the options available, it feels like AVT at tackle might be the best way to get that done. So I'm open to it. If you can get a Lloyd Cushenberry, guy like that, then I think you should be open to moving AVT to tackle, because that's how you can build your best 5. So I would strongly consider doing it if you can get a guy on the interior who makes it worth your while to put him out there. So yeah, I think we already mentioned getting Cushenberry. That'd be part of my ideal plan. Kevin Zeitler, I would add on top of that, would be a great option. He's a veteran guy with plenty of starts, still durable and reliable. His pass blocking continues to be really good. And he does come from a gap scheme in Baltimore, but he looked good in zone when I was watching him, especially in that Texans playoff game. He has good zone blocking grades as well. I think he could translate plenty good in the run game. So he should be relatively affordable because of his age. I think around 7 million he could land at. So I would love to continue the interior rebuild. Get Cushenberry at center. Zeitler and Tittman are your guards. AVT, you pick your tackle spot. Maybe keep him away from right tackle just because of the injury history. Maybe that'll weigh in his mind. I don't know. But I would love to start off the offseason with 2 good interior additions like that.
The only problem for me with AVT at tackle is it seems like it kind of pencils the Jets in to have. Hold on. The only problem with AVT at tackle and penciling him in there is it seems like you kind of pigeonhole the Jets in the draft in terms of, I mean, I guess you never know, but it's like, okay, if you say AVT's a tackle, I'm assuming you mean right tackle, although I guess he played left tackle that one game against Pittsburgh. He did it in college. Are you saying right tackle or left tackle? Because what I was going to say is like, it seems like a lot of the Jets' top options in the draft would be right tackles. And I know we said we're not going to go into the draft with the shopping list, whatever. The Jets are going to take an offensive lineman, most likely a tackle. Maybe they somehow take a guard or whatever. But they're probably going to take a tackle. So if you sign two interior guys, you shore up the interior, and you play AVT at one of the tackle spots, are you then relying on a rookie to be your left tackle, or you think AVT has the flexibility to move one more time back over to left tackle like he only did that one game against Pittsburgh?
Well, I mean, if they are moving him out to tackle, it's a move nonetheless because he did start out at guard last year and in all of his seasons. So I think he could move to left tackle. I think it's something he'd be capable of. Um, I just feel like if he's back at right tackle, there's that aspect of I don't necessarily think playing at right tackle made him get injured specifically being at that position, but just mentally, I think it would be good to move positions and not be there. But I don't know. I really would like to see him stay at guard, but it's just the way that this market looks. Because if we are keeping him at guard, the tackle options are so shaky to me. But the idea of building an interior trio of something like Cushenberry, Zeitler, Tittman, just that could be the best interior trio in the league or one of the best. So that just feels so secure. And AVT is so talented to where even if I don't love him at tackle personally, I still believe in his ability to figure out how to make it work there. And then in terms of, before I mentioned the argument of Tittman being more valuable at guard, the same thing applies to going from guard to tackle. Tackles are more valuable than guards. So that would be the best potential ceiling of impact for AVT, who is a first round pick you traded up for. So you do want to get that impact out of him. That's why, like, I didn't agree with these criticisms, but that is why, like, a lot of the, some people were criticizing that trade because they were projecting him as a guard. But you play him at tackle, then it's a whole different story in terms of the value you could get out of him. So there are risks to playing AVT at tackle, especially if it is left tackle, which he's played a lot less than right tackle in the league. But I'd be willing to do it. There's whatever they do, you're going to be taking some risks. Whether it's if you leave him at guard and you like that, now you got to bet on a Tyron Smith or another tackle even much below his talent level, who might be more durable or something like that. So if you're going to bet on something, I would bet on AVT and his talent. Is kind of how I feel
Right.
about it.
Now the only concern with AVT is coming back from the injury.
Right.
And I'd imagine you're going to sign at least one more offensive lineman, preferably a tackle, to at least shore up that spot and shore up the swing spot so you don't have to rely on Carter Warren to be that first man up if somebody's going to go down, again, assuming AVT's playing tackle and you're drafting a rookie. So who's the other offensive lineman you'd sign in this ideal scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I have Jermaine Illuminer being signed as the backup swing tackle here. And he is interesting. He might get a starter level deal because he has good numbers, but I don't know if they're totally legitimate because he had good numbers last year as well, and he's still signed for, I think, 3 or 4 million. So we'll see where he ends up, but he at the very least is a good backup option.
All right, I like Illuminor. I like that offensive lineman, that offensive line trio of Cushenberry, Zeitler, Illuminor. It looks a little bit different than both of our predictions, but I do like that idea of bringing those three in. You move AVT out to tackle. You draft at least one offensive lineman day one, and maybe you double back with another offensive lineman in round three, and just really shore up that line in front of Rodgers. Then we turn our attention to receivers, and in this ideal scenario, you go cheap. You go with the quantity over the, maybe it's not even cheap, but it's quantity over quality. You go with Kendrick Bourne, who I mentioned the last podcast, and then also it seems like there was some rumblings about a potential interest in Bourne this past week, and then OBJ, who's a guy who was nearly a Jet, who's said he wants to play with Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers has been vocal about wanting to play with him. Shouldn't be too expensive, given that he's he's older. He's not as productive as he once was. He's still a big name, and he still does bring a skill set to the table. But what do you think, or what do you like about both those guys and Bourne and OBJ, and what they would bring to the Jets receiving unit?
Yeah, I really like the idea of signing two different receivers, solid veteran guys you can rely on. And it's both financial and on field. I mean, in terms of the money, I think compared to a Calvin Ridley or trading for one of these other guys, I think you could save money by taking this route and then allocate some of that towards the offensive line. But on top of that, I think it it could build a just deeper, more well-rounded receiving group instead of here's our 1-2 punch. And I'm not saying this wouldn't be great if they can get a Sutton, Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, whatever. That would obviously be great. But I also think there's something to be said for having a deeper group versus our 1-2 is really good, but then there's a drop off after that. So with this specific duo, I think I really like the way they complement each other because Bourne is a steady route running guy who he's not a pure slot receiver. He plays outside sometimes, but tough yak guy after the catch, good route runner. He can move the chains for you and make plays underneath. And then OBJ, I think, you know, did he deliver on the $50 million contract? No. His volume wasn't great last year. He didn't really have a ton of plays on the stat sheet, but what he did do, he was efficient and he did make a lot of plays down the field. When they threw it to him, he was a good deep threat. And I think that's what's appealing to me is that, Kendrick Bourne can come in, make plays underneath in the slot, but OBJ is still there to take the top off the defense and buy some room for Garrett Wilson and make sure he's not always double covered. So when they address receiver, that's sort of the plan I would like to see them take. Let's get
What
two
do you think?
guys who complement
Well,
each other.
yeah. Well, what do you think the Jets receiver room is really lacking? I mean, you kind of laid it out a little bit in the skill set, but you think they definitely need somebody to take the top off the defense and obviously taking pressure away from Garrett Wilson. But just in terms of like the skill set, because it might help a specific player come into mind. What is the skill set in that receiver room that they're lacking?
I'd say there are two specific skills that they lack. Number one is just an overall explosive speed threat vertically. um, because it was very easy to double cover Garrett Wilson, play man coverage, then also shade help towards him because no one else was ever going to beat you vertically on this Jets defense. So someone who's capable of doing that can really balance out the way the defense plays against the Jets. But the number two thing, in addition to that, I would say is just the ability to beat man coverage, even if it's not deep. Um, if it could be third and medium, and you just need someone to get off the press, win on a quick slant over the middle, any situation like that, that's something they need too, because um, it's the same effect as not having a deep guy. These are both things that could force the defense to play you a little softer and give you some more room to work. Last year with Alan Lazard and a young receiver and Xavier Gibson, Randall Cobb, it was you could play man coverage all day and you were never going to pay for it because they didn't have a deep threat and no one could win against man coverage. So those are the two things that I think are the most important when you're looking for receivers this offseason. And there are some higher end guys who could do both of those, like a Calvin Ridley, I think gives you both of those. Cortland Sutton could do both of them. But I think you could also try to fill that with two different players. And that's why I think the Bourne OBJ combo is an intriguing one. You could address the needs of two different players and save money.
All right. I want to get to the predictions. We have two guys here who are both in both of our predictions, so maybe we'll just stay talking about them until we get to the official predictions. So, Michael, let's go back and forth here. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start with our official predictions for free agency? We have some
Yeah,
similarities.
you can go ahead and start it off.
Well, I think our offensive line predictions are fairly similar because I like the idea of George Fant making a return to the Jets. I think he's, in terms of it's a weak offensive tackle class, but I like what he brings. I like the versatility and the athleticism that he brings. He's also put together one of the better Jets left tackle seasons that we saw in 2021. He was hurt in 2022, and then played well for the Texans last year. I think he just makes a lot of sense for the Jets because he's not going to be too expensive. I think he's going to be right around, probably under what he signed for with the Jets last time, which was about a 3-year, $30 million deal. I think he's going to be less than that. I think you can get him for about $8 million a year. And I like Fant, and I would couple Fant with a guy who makes a lot of sense. And I'm looking at your prediction, Michael, so I'll just spoil it as well. But we have the exact same thing here: is both doubling up with Fant and Bakhtiari, and that
Yeah.
gives the Jets a lot of flexibility because Bakhtiari should be cheap. You think he would want to go play one last season with his buddy Aaron Rodgers, maybe 2 seasons, who knows? He's going to get a big paycheck from the Packers. I don't know which teams are out there that are going to pay him a lot of money. He might be able to get a little bit more money elsewhere, but I think the opportunity to go to New York, go be with Aaron Rodgers, protect his blind side, and then from the Jets' perspective, it's like I don't think they hand Bakhtiari anything. I think you kind of look at him as offensive tackle number 3, although he'll probably start out as left tackle number 1, and maybe Fant or maybe the rookie is the swing tackle to start things off. But you just can't rely on him to play a full season. When he's out there, he's been great. So I think he's probably penciled in left tackle 1 initially, and then maybe it's Fant taking over. Maybe it's the rookie, just depending on who they draft. And maybe Fant starts at the right side. But I just like the idea of bringing in those 2 tackles, and it just ups the overall talent level of the Jets. I think, I thought about giving the Jets a big fish and Tyron Smith here, just because I do think they're going to make a big move, and I'll get to that next. I do think they make at least one big move that kind of gets people excited. And I thought about Tyron Smith. He, like Bakhtiari, has his own injury issues, and so I think that's one of the reasons I shied away from him. And then you laid it out as well. It's like there are just so many other teams that can just pay him so much more, and the Jets have all these holes to fill. And it's like they could go give Tyron Smith an $18 million a year contract for 3 years or whatever he gets, maybe a little less than that, but something around around those margins. I just don't know if that's best for the Jets. Like they just need to fill holes right now. And when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers, when you have high end players like Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall, you just need competence around them. I think one of the things you really like about Aaron Rodgers, in theory, is that because he's such a whiz at the line of scrimmage, he's going to be able to get the ball out of his hands quickly. Obviously, that wasn't the case in the 4th play of the game, but he was trying to make something deep happen to Uzama, whatever. We're past that. And then at receiver, you just need guys that he trusts. And I think the veteran options are going to be more likely for Rodgers. I mean, that was a big criticism or complaint that was brought up in 2022 was that he had all these young receivers in Green Bay, and it led to a lot of frustration. They weren't on the same page. I think the Jets just want to surround it with a number of veteran receivers. They know that Garrett Wilson is the Lamborghini, and then they just have a bunch of other guys who maybe bring a specific skill set, like that deep speed over the top, or maybe a less of an athlete but a better route runner who could beat man coverage like a Kendrick Bourne. Just competence around him, and I think you could find that with the day 3, day 4 free agents and the guys who are going to be more of a bang for your buck. So I contemplated going big here with Tyron Smith. I do think it is potentially in the cards. It does seem like a very Jets thing to do, but ultimately I think the offensive line is going to be a quantity over quality here. And I think Fant is a great player. We had him on the show. I mean, it feels weird because it was so long ago, it feels like. But we had him on, it was like what? Like I think end of 2022 around.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
assuming the relationship can be repaired, I don't think it was too nasty towards the end, but obviously a little bit of animosity. I think they can get Bakhtiari, and then I think honestly, Michael, I'll differ from you a little bit on the interior, but if there's anything you want to touch on there, I know I kind of just laid it all out. But the Fant Bakhtiari duo to shore up the tackle spots for the Jets.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that prediction. Bakhtiari I wouldn't necessarily be the hugest fan of it, but it's just hard to not see that happening. And I know he's an anti-turf guy, but with Rodgers being there,
He's gonna play on turf anyway.
the Jets needing it, a tackle, and Rodgers just having so much pull in terms of who's coming to this team. It's hard for me not to see that happening. And then Fant, I agree. Like if you're signing Bakhtiari, you have to get a starting tackle. Like Bakhtiari doesn't exist. He's just there. If he's healthy, great, he plays, but you're assuming he's not going to be. So George Fant fills that role as the quasi starter unless Bakhtiari's healthy. And I think,
Yeah, and
yeah,
maybe Fant starts at right tackle, and you have the rookie who, just depending on how things go, you know what I mean. Like, it's not necessarily sending George Fant to the bench immediately. I think if you pay him well enough, he's not going to really care, especially since
right,
the guy in front of him, Bakhtiari, has such an injury issue, but history. So, but yeah, I think I just like that Fant brings you versatility. He's been here before. He stayed relatively healthy. I know 2022 was a little shaky, but Bakhtiari is the high end guy. And hey, maybe you get a guy who in Bakhtiari, maybe he plays 12, 13 games. Or maybe he's like Tyron Smith and he only plays like 10, but he's around at the end of the season when it really counts. And if you have a healthy Bakhtiari in January, hoping the Jets are playing playoffs games, that could be the difference maker between the Jets advancing and going home. So I definitely like the idea of signing Bakhtiari. I'm not as against it. I'm not saying you're against it, but you sound like not enthused about it. I think Bakhtiari could end up being a really key contributor. It's just you can't rely on him at all.
right.
So you have to pair him with somebody. If they can't get Fant, I think Illuminor is the other guy to look at. But I think you sign Bakhtiari and then you pair him with Fant or Illuminor to kind of fill that backup role, but likely starter. And then in the interior, I mean, both of us, I think, have AVT playing guard. In this situation, I know we said the ideal one might be sending him out to tackle because you could probably build the best offensive line. But in yours, you have the Jets signing James Hurst. And when we were talking, I think it was yesterday, we were talking and kind of just going over what we thought this podcast would be. And you mentioned Hurst. And the one thing you said is versatility. And then I looked at him and on Pro Football Reference, and you see he's just pretty much played across the entire offensive line. And I was like, when the Jets are in their pro personnel meetings and Joe Douglas is presented with that player profile, I have a hard time believing he wouldn't be all over that. So maybe just talk about James Hurst a little bit, and then I'll give you who I had the Jets signing in the interior.
Yeah, I think Hurst is a really good guy to look at as a potential part of this Jets offseason for a lot of reasons. I think he fits perfectly into the type of plan we've talked about laying out. And, what's the bottom line we've discussed so far? It's the quantity of holes that the Jets have to fill and that they're going to have to do it with, solid options that are within a price range to where the Jets could still fill the rest of these holes. And I think he fits into that really well because, look, he's not the greatest guard in the world. I'm not saying you're getting a superstar. He's 32 years old. Um, he's not received the biggest contracts throughout his career, so it's not like he's viewed as a high-end player. But he's extremely versatile. He's played, I believe, 4 out of the 5 positions extensively. His pass blocking production in recent years has been really good, and he's done it despite moving positions and despite playing on a Saints team that has had a lot of injury in the offensive line around him. He's really been the only, outside of their center, Eric McCoy is really good. Outside of him, the only other really good pass protector. He's not the greatest run blocker in the world. I think you'll suffer a little bit there, but his pass protection has been really good. He's versatile, and I think you get him affordably because of his age. So he's the type of guy who I think could fit really well into the type of offseason the Jets are trying to have.
Yeah, I like Hurst as well, and honestly, I'm just going to do this to be different, but I really could see Hurst. I think he's a guy who makes a lot of sense. But I'll say Zeitler. Might be more expensive. I think he will be, but he's 2 years older. But I honestly just think that the Jets are going to spend big on the interior, and relatively speaking, and Hurst is a little bit more intriguing to me because I think you can get him for cheaper. I mean, you have him listed here at $5 million. I think he gets more than that. Zeitler might be a little higher. Zeitler might be closer to 9 or 10 million. But I think the Jets really just missed. Like, I look at the Chiefs and I think that they've built one of the better offensive lines, and they've done it without having amazing tackles. At least last year, they did it with having Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, and why am I spacing on Joe Tooney? Geez, there we go. And having a really strong trio up front, and that really keeps plays alive for Patrick Mahomes. It kind of stabilizes the entire offense, not having that constant interior pressure. So whether it's Hurst or whether it's Zeitler, I just love the fact that I think they can go get somebody from that first tier of guards, and it's up to you if you think Hurst is in that A tier. I mean, especially with no Dotson on the market or no Cleveland, I think he is. But in my prediction, I'll go with Zeitler because he for sure is in that top tier because of the upgrade he's going to give you in the run game. and we know the Jets are going to want to run the ball with Breece Hall. I think he can bring some of the nastiness to this Jets offensive line that they've been missing. But whether it's Hurst or Zeitler, I just love the idea of
By
shoring
the
up
way,
the
I
interior of the
don't know
offensive line.
how
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
haven't realized this yet, but Joe Douglas was still a scout in Baltimore when they signed James Hurst as an undrafted free agent rookie.
Oh,
So
wow. Look at that. All
I'm
right.
starting to be
There's little
all
JD.
over this. If there were some odds out there
Well,
on free
I had a
agents,
whole thing prepared. I
James
had a whole thing.
Hurst.
I'll be honest. I had a whole thing prepared for Hurst, and then I was like, we can't go 3 for 3 on the prediction. So I tried to pivot with Zeitler a little bit. But yeah, I think Hurst makes a lot more sense. But whatever. I think versatility is key, and both him and Fant have the ability to just move all across the offensive line and AVT and Tippmann, and it gives the Jets, a number of combinations if they do suffer the injury fate that they've constantly been suffering. But I think this is where things are going to get a little different, Michael, because initially, I think we were going to be on the same page. I'll be honest, this morning I was going to go with the Kendrick Bourne OBJ route because all right, OBJ, I think it's going to happen. He has that connection to Rodgers. It makes me feel a little, maybe this is, you know, isn't much, but if Garrett Wilson were to go down, I like that. Okay, you have a guy in OBJ who maybe he's not the same OBJ that he once was, but he's still a damn good route runner. He still can take the top off of a defense. Um, and I think his connection with Rodgers could be kind of special. And you can get it for cheap. So I was in on OBJ, and then Kendrick Bourne's been a guy I've been talking about for a couple weeks now. And I think the Jets liked his profile when he was a free agent coming out of San Francisco a couple years ago. I think he would be nice in the slot. He's a good route runner. He could be a guy that could really help move the chain for the Jets. And like you said, just take some pressure off of Garrett Wilson in those man coverage situations. He's coming off the torn ACL, but there was the report today that he should be ready for training camp. So that was what I was initially going to go with. But you know what, Michael? I was driving home from work today, and I just said, you know what? I think the Jets are going to do it. I think the Jets trade for Courtland Sutton. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but here's my prediction. I do think Zach Wilson will be involved in the trade. It's not a must. I don't think that they need to trade him to get Courtland Sutton, but I just have a feeling like I could see Zach Wilson in a fourth going for Courtland Sutton. Maybe it's like you said, a pick swap, the third and the fifth, or whatever it is. But ultimately, I think Courtland Sutton is the move that the Jets make. But I will say, I do think that the Jets circle back and go get a guy who can take the top off of a defense. As much as I love Kendrick Bourne, I think that they maybe don't go that route, and maybe they go with the OBJ route. Maybe they go with Sutton and OBJ, which is a little bit more. Sutton's going to cost you about $10 million, and OBJ is going to be probably, what do you think, $6 to $7 million.
Yeah.
But maybe that connection with Rodgers does seem like it could be something that could be special, especially if the Jets face some injuries. But if it's not going to be OBJ, I listed a couple other guys that I think could help take the top off the defense, and some that we haven't really talked about, but like Curtis Samuel, DJ Chark, I'm spacing on his first, and KJ Osborne from the Vikings. You talked about Josh Reynolds. I think that they go and get Sutton, and then they go and pair him with somebody in free agency who can be more of that speedster and take the top off the defense. And then you've built a receiver unit around Rodgers that is, I won't say infallible to injury, but you at least feel a lot better about. You have Garrett Wilson as your top option. You have Courtland Sutton as a guy who can take a lot of pressure off of him, and then you have maybe a guy like OBJ who can take the top off of a defense. You can get him a lot more. You'll probably give Garrett Wilson a lot of slot reps, but you can give OBJ some slot reps. God knows what they're going to do with Alan Lazard. I think I kind of foresee him in a bit of like a Quincy Enunwa 2015 role, playing a lot of H-back, getting him in line with the line of scrimmage, giving him some yak opportunities. And then obviously he's Sutton's backup as another big-bodied receiver. So yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking is I think the big swing or the big surprise or the exciting move would be a trade for Courtland Sutton, who I think could be had, but I do think they'll double dip in free agency and go get a speedster. Maybe they address that in the draft, might be more economical, but the OBJ connection and is a little too exciting for me to pass up.
Yeah, for me, I have Tyler Boyd and Josh.
You have no thoughts on that? You have no thoughts? All right, we'll get straight into you.
I thought you wanted
me
to get. You didn't ask me to get any thoughts on yours.
All right.
I thought you just wanted me to get straight into
mine. I thought I was really going to blow your mind with that Courtland Sutton OBJ. It was such a pivot from our conversation. But no, you can get straight to yours.
I like it though. I would be a huge fan of that. I mean, the depth you would have, and I think like you said, the ability to withstand injury would be much superior to last season. So I would be a big fan of that for sure. But
right.
for me,
a boring option.
Yeah, I am going more boring here because this is the prediction. So I'm always going to tone it down because reality is, usually more disappointing than the dream off seasons
All
we have.
right, all right, all
I mean,
right.
we got Dalvin Cook last year. Who
Yeah,
wanted him?
we got Rogers too in the same. Okay, well, I know you're
That's
being
true.
facetious, but
That's true.
come on now.
Did get Aaron Rodgers, who's kind of good at football. But I'm going with Tyler
Especially,
Boyd and Josh Reynolds. Same kind of mold as the Kendrick Bourne OBJ combo, just different players. I think Tyler Boyd has been a really consistent slot guy in Cincinnati for a long time, but could see his price drop now because he's getting up there a little bit in age. Production kind of fell off last season, and I know Joe Burrow was hurt, but he didn't have the greatest season, and he's going to turn 30 in November. Um, but I still think like this is the type of guy that I could see Aaron Rodgers saying, like, "Hey, focus on the offensive line, and if you give me a guy like this, I can make that work." A veteran, savvy slot guy with good hands, good route running, good eyes too. I mean, Boyd is not. He's a big slot at 6'2", 203. He's not one of these tiny slot guys out there. So I could really see Rodgers telling the front office, "I don't need a superstar. Just give me some guys I can rely on. Let's fill this room out." And I think Boyd can fit into that really well. And then for my vertical guy, Josh Reynolds. He's not necessarily a speedster, but he has good size. He's 6'3". He's been a really efficient deep threat for the Lions over the past couple seasons. He's been really good at the catch point with his contested catches and things like that. Kind of like a lighter version of what you're looking for in a Sutton. Lower volume, complimentary guy, but same type of thing. And he's done that really well in a limited role in Detroit. So this is what I kind of see happening between all the offensive line signings and the receivers. Just a lot of that mid-level, solid. Let's get these holes filled. Try to plug everything because at the end of the day, this offense is going to go as far as Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall take it. And you just want to give them the opportunity to do that by having as few liabilities as possible. We're just going to drag the
Right.
unit down. The superstar talent is in place with those three guys I just mentioned. Outside of that, you just don't want the offensive lineman you had last season who made it an unplayable environment. You don't want to have the receivers who were so bad that Garrett Wilson couldn't do his thing. So I think that's going to be the goal. Let's just get these holes plugged so the superstars we do already have, they have an opportunity to play their best.
All right, a couple more guys here. We knocked out the big ones in the offensive line and receiver, and I agree with you. A little different with our receiver takes. I think offensive line, I mean, I said Zeitler, but I think we're pretty much in sync with the Fant, Bakhtiari, Hurst trio heading into the draft. You can double dip there in the first and third round. Maybe just in the first round, you come back in day three, but you set yourself up to build a really nice, deep offensive line in front of Rodgers. And then we've talked about the receivers, how you can really fill out that room. And then you feel a lot better about this Jets offense. I mean, if they do any of this that we've said, I think you feel a lot better about the Jets' chances in the playoffs. Obviously, there are a few re-signings you want to see them do. I'd like to see them obviously bring back the special teams guys, Morstead and Zerline. You'd like to see them bring back Chuck Clark and Ashton Davis at safety. There's been some rumblings because there's been some safeties that have been released. Justin Simmons, Jordan Poyer. The Jets doesn't seem like Jordan Whitehead's going to come back. Maybe they'll sign a safety. I don't think it's worth it. I think honestly, just bring back Davis and Clark. You can draft another one if you really want, but I'll trust the Jets and their defensive coaching staff to coach up somebody at that spot rather than spend any resources there. Because after all these signings, Michael, they're going to have a little bit of cap to work with here, just obviously depending on some of the restructures. But they have a few more holes, namely backup quarterback. I think we have the same one here. I have an alternate option just to be different from you, but I think the one that a lot of people have just connected the dots on is Ryan Tannehill, who you could get for fairly cheap. He wasn't all that good last year. He has the obvious connection to Todd Downing, the Jets passing game coordinator, and he would immediately be one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. And I don't think he's a guy you'd have to break the bank for. So you'd feel good about him and he's older, I guess, but he's not. In comparison to the 40-year-old starting quarterback, he's young, I guess. He has some athleticism left. And, you go back even 2 or 3 years, he was looking pretty good for Tennessee and taking them into the playoffs. So I think you feel good about Tannehill. The other guy that I could really see, I mean, I don't see the Jets going for Brissett. I think he gets a little bit of a higher deal. I could see. I mean, I saw some rumblings about him in New England. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, I think he goes to a place where he has a chance to start or compete against a rookie quarterback, not sit behind Aaron Rodgers. But a guy that I could see coming to sit behind Aaron Rodgers and that the Jets could very well pay would be Jimmy Garoppolo, who is suspended for the first 2 games of the season. But as long as the Jets don't have Rodgers blow his Achilles on the fourth play of the game, that should be fine. Should be a problem. Um, I like Garoppolo. I think he's a better player than Tannehill. He obviously has some injury risks, but I do think he's a better quarterback. He has some experience with Saleh. I just think he's a different name. I ultimately this is the prediction part of things, so I do think it'll be Tannehill. But I'll throw in Jimmy Garoppolo in here just because we haven't talked about him all that much, and I could see that connection happening. So what do you think about the backup quarterback options that the Jets should sign?
I think it's going to be Tannehill just because of the strong Tennessee influence and the coaching staff. They already had Downing and Keith Carter, and now they added Tony Dews. So I think it's not the most inspiring because he really did not have a good season. He got benched for Will Levis, and he is getting up there in age. He's also not super durable, but this is a guy who has been a starter for a really long time and is only a couple years removed from playing at a really high level. So, I think with backups, you keep your expectations subdued. They're backups for a reason, and it would be a risky. He'd be a risky backup. Like I would love to get a Brissett. I think he's a perfect backup just because of how high his floor is. But like you said, I think Brissett. I think teams are going to see his value. He's going to get a bridge quarterback type of starting job. So I don't know if that's going to be a realistic option. So I think that's going to point them to Tannehill, and I wouldn't be my favorite option, but that's what I see as the most likely.
All right, another guy who's released this past week, Foley Fatukasi, the Jets. It's an underrated need. It's the only defensive free agent I think we're going to talk about at all. But we know the Jets love their defensive line. They're going to have to replace, at the very least, they're going to have to replace Al Woods, but also Quentin Jefferson and Solomon Thomas are free agents. You also have a guy in Quentin Williams that, if God forbid he went down, you have a massive hole. So the Jets are going to be interested in that defensive tackle market. Do you see the Fatukasi reunion? I know there's some people disagree that maybe he's not the perfect scheme fit. He is more of a run stuffer. But we saw the Jets sign Al Woods, and we saw the pros and cons of that last year. So what do you think about the Fatukasi reunion, or is there a different defensive tackle you like more?
No, I think it's a great fit to fill that last spot because, they showed by signing Woods they do want one guy at the back of that defensive tackle rotation who is a run stuffing specialist, and he can fill that. But I like his fit because I talked about it a lot with Al Woods. He was really a zero as a pass rusher at this point of his career. I don't think Foley is that. From his Jets days, like if you remember, he was a pretty good pass rusher for his role. I'm not saying he was good in general or like he's as good as a Quentin Jefferson, but he for a player who's as good as he is in the run game, he brings you some pass rush juice. He can make a play now and then. So, and he's a really good athlete overall for his size. So I think he would fill the Al Woods role while being a better scheme fit because he is a good athlete and a solid pass rusher for a run stuffer. So I love the fit if they can go after him and get him. I know I saw he was visiting with the Texans yesterday. So he didn't sign with them, but that one did happen. So we'll see where he ends up going if the Jets look for the reunion. I would be all for that.
All right, last signing here. Last signing for the prediction, Michael. Backup running back. I do think the Jets sign one. I just think you can get better bang for your buck. I mean, you could sign a veteran running back who's been a starter in this league for fairly cheap compared to the Jets having to draft a guy in day 3, which might be slightly cheaper. You might have the higher upside. Ultimately, it's like you just want a guy backing up Breece Hall to take some of those hits. And if God forbid if Breece Hall were to go down, a guy who can come in. It's a pretty good free agent running back market as well, and you could probably get away with paying a guy $2 million. So I do think it's what the Jets will ultimately do, or $2 million or less. Honestly, it's ultimately what I think the Jets will do. So who do you think will be the backup running back for the Jets in 2024?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys out here. I've kind of struggled to pick one who I think is likely or my favorite out of these. I do think they're going to tap into it just to make sure going into the draft that they have some security locked in because they're so unproven behind Brees Hall. Like it's Izzy Abanikanda and that's it pretty much. So I think they're going to sign someone here. Who's it going to be? Um, I'm scrolling through the list right now, trying to see who
Oh,
stands
you didn't
out to
write it
me.
down? Oh my.
Can't really. The only guy who stands out, and I've written about him before, is Patrick Taylor from the Packers, and he doesn't really give you the experience aspect that we're talking about, but he's a younger guy who showed a lot of upside for Green Bay in a limited sample past year, so I could see that. Maybe like a Devin Singletary type. I think could see them signing. His value kind of fell off this year. Didn't have a great season, but starter with experience who's been pretty solid all around for most of his career, but doesn't really excite you in any way. So that could mean he'll be cheap. So he could be like a solid RB2. So I could see
I
someone
mean, you're
like
missing
that.
the obvious one. You're missing the obvious one.
Let's hear it.
AJ Dillon.
I thought about it. I just didn't bring it up because I think he's going to be a little expensive for what I think they're going to spend on this.
You think? I was looking at, I mean, maybe
I mean,
you
if he
probably
gets
know
like
more about him.
4 mil, say, like, don't you think that's a little much for an RB
I
two?
think, yeah. I mean, I think he could get a little bit less than that. I think he had a kind of a down year in 2023, but you're right. He's just 25. Um, but I think he's a good backup to what the Jets have in
I
Brees
do
Hall. Just a
like
guy who can take some of this.
him and the fit. Like that's the type of guy I would like to get is, just a good uh, power guy who can get consistent chunks. He doesn't necessarily have to be a home run hitter, but if he can come in and say, just give me a couple 4 yarders while Brees is on the sideline, that's the type of guy I would like to have more so than a home run hitter, I would say. But yeah, I just don't know how much he's going to get or if it would be worth it for the Jets.
Some of the other guys, Zach Moss from the Colts, who I know was key in your fantasy team. The last one that I think is worth mentioning, J.K. Dobbins, who another torn Achilles, but he did rehab during the season with Aaron Rodgers, so he's built a bit of a friendship with him. Wouldn't surprise me if that's one of the guys that like. Look, we all criticize all the Rodgers buddies moves that the Jets made last year. I don't. If it's a backup running back for cheap, I don't mind doing it honestly with a guy like J.K. Dobbins who has a high ceiling but hasn't been able to stay healthy. I could see the Jets bringing in him as well. So that's ultimately our predictions here. We're in line with the offensive line and the Fant Bakhtiari solution. If they don't get Fant, maybe it's a Luminor. Then ultimately in the interior, going for a guy like Hurst or Zeitler. At receiver, we differed a little bit. I do think they're going to go for a bit more of a household name in Cortland Sutton to be the receiver too. But I do think they'll double dip there with a speedster, somebody who can get down the field. Kind of what the vision they may have had with McCole Hardman, honestly. And maybe that's Curtis Samuel or KJ Osborne, or maybe it's OBJ. And then obviously we like the backup quarterback connection with Ryan Tannehill, bringing back a guy in Foley Fatukasi, and bringing back, in the reunion between Nathaniel Hackett and AJ Dillon. Those last three obviously all have connections to the Jets. Maybe they'll go elsewhere, but those are easy to draw the lines from. And then, as always, every single free agency, there's always guys that we just didn't talk about, or depth guys that we have to look into. So obviously, we'll have a podcast next week talking about any of the moves that they do make. I'm excited for it. I'm back in. I'm back invested into building up this team. There's a lot to be excited about. It's been doom and gloom here for a couple months, but hey, we're ready to roll. Patch up this offensive line, patch up the receiver unit, and I'm feeling good about the Jets' chances at finally snapping that playoff drought. But you can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. Myself, Ben W. Blessington, Michael _Nania. Go to jetsxfactor.com. Best place to go for Jets content. Check out some of the other JetX pods. Subscribe to the JetX YouTube. If you can, please rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. Michael, I think that's it. Last thoughts.
I don't really have any. I'm just ready for free agency to be here. I've been getting burnt out, like writing so many free agency articles. I'm just ready to see what happens.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So no big fish in your predictions, but ultimately I do like the amount of holes they're able to fill. I think they make the trade for Sutton. I don't know. I just have a feeling about it. Maybe I'm wrong. I think they make a trade at the very least, and that doesn't just include Zach Wilson. They're going to make a trade for a player. that we're not talking about, or we are in Sutton. I don't know. So just ponder that this weekend, Michael. Maybe they do it this weekend. Maybe they do it before free agency. You never know.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly when we'll be back. Bit of a busy schedule for me recently, but we obviously will have one in the middle of the week next week. If they do something big Tuesday night, maybe. Probably more realistic. We'll have a podcast come out Wednesday night, Thursday morning, I think, probably, because I don't think the Jets are going to come out of the gates hot with like 5 signings. I think we'll probably see the signings really trickle in. I mean, I guess it starts Monday, right?
Yeah.
So maybe Tuesday night. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Be on the lookout for a podcast in the middle of next week that'll talk about the first wave of Jet signings. I'd say Wednesday or Thursday. And yeah, I guess thank you for listening. Everybody have a great weekend. Excited for free agency. Football is finally kind of back. Have a good one. Go Jets.